Hello, Juliet.
Hello, how are
How,
you?
I'm good. How are you?
Is my am I yeah, I wanted to make sure that you could hear me.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah. Before going to your session, I would like to introduce you to our audience, Juliet.
Mhm. Absolutely. I was here for most of yesterday, so thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah. Juliet Spencer is a certified high performance coach, certified United methodologist, pastor, speaker, and founder of Georges and Grace, dedicated to empowering women leaders with clarity, confidence, and resilience. Combining decades of leadership experience with expertise in mindset, identity, and behavior change. She helps individuals align their values with purposeful action. Through her coaching, podcast, and speaking engagements, Juliet inspires leaders worldwide to create lasting personal and professional transformation. That was a great bio, Dr. Juliet, and the stage is all yours.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And thank you everyone. I want to make sure that my uh slides can be seen. I don't. There we go. So grateful to be here. It's especially a privilege to be here because I was here yesterday and wow, what a great group of speakers we had. So it is a double blessing and humbling to be included in this group. But I do have a confession to make. For 30 years, I was living a story that I didn't know I still believed. I'd become accustomed to it because it's as though it was on autopilot, on background noise throughout my entire or most of my life. And it led me to ask questions like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I get past this? Why why do I not have any confidence? But those questions really didn't help me. They just kept me looking backward. For years, I was haunted by an experience, multiple experiences actually. When I was 14, I a distant family member took advantage of my childhood, my naivete, my youth in a way that no one should ever be treated. And then in my 14-year-old brain, I envisioned him laughing about it, bragging about it. And that really set me down a very difficult path that lasted for years. Even when I wasn't thinking about it, the experience changed who I was, as though it had tentacles that just invaded every part of my being. Let's see. I'm trying to there to get the slide to change. There we go. So maybe your story began somewhere different. Maybe it was criticism or a painful disappointment. For me, when I finally had the courage to tell someone what happened 4 years later, I told someone I trusted and loved and who I know loved me, but for reasons I will never understand. She did not believe me. For you, it may be something, a divorce, burnout, a boss who tries to convince you that you're just not smart enough, you're not capable enough. Different stories, but the same result. We begin living according to scripts that we never intentionally wrote. And mine whispered, stay small, stay safe, don't make waves. I never consciously chose those beliefs, but I did live as though they were true. I would walk into a room, especially of women, and my very first thought was, how do I compare? Oh, I'm not as pretty or as thin or as smart. One of the saddest things I've learned as both a pastor and a coach is that so many of us spend enormous amounts of energy asking if we're enough without ever really asking enough for whom? Whose expectations? Who gets to decide? Because the loudest voice we hear in our heads is often not the truest one. But the good news is that what shaped you doesn't have to define you. For several years, well, a long time actually, I let that story define me. But then an older colleague of mine, Reverend Doug Kane, said to me one day, Juliet, your church, your family, we need you. We need you to quit playing small and quit playing safe. We need you to step into the leader that God created you to be and to quit playing someone you're not. Well, I wish I could tell you that I believed him right away, but I didn't. However, his words did open a door. And for the first time, I stopped asking, what's wrong with me? And I began asking, how can I move forward? One question assumed that I was broken, the other assumed I was capable. I didn't know it then, but that conversation planted the idea that opened my mind and my soul to the one question that has since shaped everything: my leadership, my relationships, my ministry, my coaching, my life. Who do I choose to be? It's almost laughable because you would think, how can such an obvious and simple question have that much power? But it does, because it removes the power of the past. Who I choose to be doesn't let the past inform who I choose to be now, not even yesterday. Who I choose to be right now, well, that question became the beginning of a new chapter in my life. And it's because I wasn't simply changing my behavior, I was changing my identity. So, what happened when I began asking that question? Well, at first, I assumed that I was simply becoming more intentional. But what I didn't realize was that I was changing a lot more than my behavior. I was changing the way my brain interpreted the world. And that changed everything. Because identity drives behavior. Most of us try to change our behavior or our lives from the outside in. We say, I'm going to be more confident. I'm going to stop people pleasing. I'm going to have better boundaries. And then we focus on behavior. But behavior is the fruit, identity is the root. If I still believe that I'm a woman who has to keep everybody happy, then my behavior is eventually going to reflect that belief. But if I believe that I am a woman created by God, then my behavior is going to change because my identity has changed. Identity drives behavior. And then confidence follows choice. In other words, identity informs the kind of thoughts that we allow ourselves to think, which then informs our choices. which leads to our actions, which brings us different results. But it all starts with identity. And every choice that we make, it continues to reinforce the conversation that we have about ourselves. So, for instance, if I continue to avoid hard conversations, then my brain is going to tell me, see, you're someone who can't handle conflict. You're a coward. But if I have one courageous conversation, then my brain begins collecting different data, different evidence. One choice doesn't necessarily change everything, but repeated choices create a new story, which creates a new identity. And that's one of the reasons that I love coaching. We aren't trying to manufacture confidence. We are supporting a healthier identity. Now, I didn't know the neuroscience back then. I just knew I felt differently. But now we know the brain is remarkably adaptable. When we repeatedly think and act in new ways, then it strengthens the pathways in our brains. We become more likely to respond from our chosen identity instead of from our old patterns. Confidence doesn't usually come first. Choice comes first, actions follow, and then confidence usually follows that. Sometimes people ask me, well, did you just have an aha moment? Well, not exactly. I didn't wake up one day and suddenly feel completely fearless, but I kept choosing the woman I wanted to be until one day that choice felt more natural than the old script. One of my favorite scriptures from the Christian Bible is Romans chapter 12, verse 2. And I love that before neuroscientists were talking about rewiring the brain, scripture was already talking about rewiring the mind. And notice it doesn't say be informed, it says be transformed. Transformation takes time. One decision, one conversation, one prayer, one day at a time. And then over time, that's what changed my life. But I do want to tell you of another experience that also had a tremendous impact. I had been asked to preach in front of a room full of my colleagues, fellow preachers, fellow pastors. And this particular conference included what I would call some of my denomination's big dogs, the national leaders. And so I just kept praying the same prayer over and over and over as I was preparing. Lord, don't let me screw up. Don't let me screw up. That's what I prayed. But then, as I was driving to the venue, I heard a voice and felt a prompting that I describe for me as the Holy Spirit. Now, it was a voice that sounded shockingly like my own, but yet it was more. And it said, Juliet, you are praying the wrong prayer. You're praying from an old story. You're praying from an old identity. And things stopped. I was starting to get it. I had been asking for protection from failure instead of giving God thanks for an opportunity to strengthen my skills and to use my gifts. So I prayed a different prayer. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for this chance to grow. Thank you for my training and for my experience and for my passion. And I know you hear the difference as much as I did. One prayer was born of insecurity, and the other was born from gratitude and confidence. Now, the audience didn't change. The expectations didn't change. I changed. My identity changed. And I walked into that room with a refined and strengthened awareness. my choice. Who do I choose to be? That's why that question is so powerful. But how do you use it when life gets really stressful? When life gets super stressful, like when you're walking into a meeting with the big dogs or whatever is going on in your own life, identity becomes even more important the higher the stress. And so here are 5 simple steps that I use before any kind of important meeting, before this, for example. Anytime that I feel those old patterns starting to whisper in my mind and draw me back to that old identity. So, step 1, pause. Most reactions happen because we don't pause long enough to choose what we want our reaction to be. But thankfully, one slow breath can often interrupt that autopilot. Step 2, ask, who do I choose to be right now? And you'll notice I didn't say, who do I feel like being? Because feelings should not drive the bus. Amen. If you have emotions like mine that could be all over the place, you would get me in any event. So then step 3 is to choose one word. Now, for today, for instance, my word might be relaxed. I choose to be relaxed. Or maybe it might be courageous. Whatever you need and want and choose to be in whatever it is you're facing. And then after you choose that word, then you do something else. You complete a sentence with it. So step 4 is complete one sentence. So as a courageous leader, if that's the word I chose, then I speak truth with grace. Or maybe as a compassionate friend, if compassion is my voice, my chosen word, then I might say, as a compassionate friend, I listen and don't immediately try to solve. Or as a gracious parent, I'll spend time playing cards instead of reading to unwind when I get home. Identity comes before behavior. And I'm not pretending, I'm deciding. And then step 5, I ask, what's the very next action that reflects this chosen identity? What's the very next right step? And I only want to work on the next one because most progress doesn't come in leaps. It's just one step at a time. So there's clearly an old story that is trying to hijack our minds. If you're anything like me, and I suspect many of you are, there is that whole old story. However, when you choose, when you become the identity of your choice, then you recognize that that old story, that old voice, that old identity doesn't get to vote. It may show up, but it does not get to vote. And so for me, oops, I went a little too fast. What did it mean to be able to say, I'm not letting that old version of me, the one that insisted on playing it safe and staying small so as not to draw attention, not to present as a courageous person, because I would hear that voice, woman, who do you think you are? But once I stepped into the new me by making a choice, who do I choose to be? Well, then at 50, I decided to get matching tattoos with my kids, and I was the pastor. And then at 55, I decided I was going to learn how to rollerblade. Rollerblade. Now, I would still be rollerblading, by the way, if for one really important problem. I never learned how to stop. Anyway, it also gave me the courage to show up to staff meeting like this because I knew our entire team needed to laugh. Who do you choose to be right now? Before you head into any experience, that's a question you get to ask. And the beautiful thing is, nobody gets to answer it but you. You know, Doug Kane was remarkable. He opened my mind by saying, you are made to be more than you give yourself credit for. And today, I don't have any idea what kind of old stories are holding you back. But for those of you who have them, I'm privileged to be the one to say to you today, you are not that story. You are mighty, capable, intelligent, beloved, created. So who do you choose to be? And maybe you want a little help with that. So I've created this gift, and you can just scan the QR code. It's a free 10-minute clarity PDF. And I promise it doesn't need to take more than 10 minutes, but it will help you answer that question for yourself. Not the old story, because it doesn't get to vote. But who do I choose to be today? Well, thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity. So, what inspired the powerful question, who do I choose to be? That's a great question, Melinda. Actually, it came from multiple sources all at the same time. The first person I heard it from specifically that way was Brendan Burchard. I am a certified coach from Brendan Burchard, the most well-known life coach in the world. And that's a question that he asks every single day. Who do I choose to be? So he's the first person I heard it from. But I think in my own way, I'd been trying to ask that question for a long time. I just didn't know that's what I was doing. So, how, Madison, thank you for asking, how can changing our identity transform the way we lead and influence others? Well, so much of our behavior comes from those stories that we tell ourselves, the ones that are on autopilot that we don't even realize we're allowing to drive the bus. But when we take time and we say, nope, in this situation, on this day, before I walk into that room, before I lead that team, who do I choose to be? I ask that question usually more than once a day, but at the very least, I ask it every single morning. Who do I choose to be? And then when we walk into lead something, someone, a group of people to influence, whether it's a spouse, our kids, coworkers, people who work for us, the fact that you are coming from a different place automatically changes the dynamic. So a fearful person, an insecure person, is going to react in a way that is different from a confident, calm person, from a person who's choosing curiosity instead of fear, from a person who is choosing generosity instead of judgment. All of those chosen identities impact the choices we make because they impact the kinds of thoughts we allow ourselves to have. And then over time, our brains rewire so that you literally become a different kind of leader. So I hope that that answered your question. How do you encourage, and thank you, Catherine, how do you encourage individuals to overcome self-doubt and embrace their true purpose? Well, first of all, let me say I am a big believer in therapy. So I don't diminish in any way that therapy can be incredibly helpful in this regard. I also know that little bitty micro choices, little bitty choices add up over time to transformation. But it begins when you say, I'm choosing a different identity. So for instance, if I say, I'll give you an example. I know that sugar is not good for me personally. But if I say, um, I just am not going to eat sugar, then as I watch my husband eat sugar, I'm going to go up and ask for a bite. But if I say I am a person who does not eat sugar, and I continue to tell myself I am a person who does not eat sugar, then my actions become a lot easier because it's who I am, not what I do. And so how do you encourage people to overcome self-doubt? Well, first you start with yourself. And then you also perhaps pour into them the identity you see in them, like Doug Kane did to me. You are more than you're giving yourself credit for. That's where I would start, is just reinforcing in them every time they make a good choice. I think my time is up, and I'm so very grateful.
Yeah, yes, Juliet, thank you. Thank you for your presentation and answering all the questions.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, please stay on the backstage and join the next session, Juliet.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.